How did a black preacher from Dallas manage to save himself from being lynched by a white mob? For Reverend David Reed Stokes, it took more than a miracle.
Dallas, Texas Black History Uncensored.
In 1903, Reverend David Reed Stokes was a prominent preacher from Dallas, Texas, known not only for his fiery sermons, but also for his ability to connect with everyday people. Reverend Stokes decided to travel from town to town to deliver an important message. He believed prohibition wasn't a moral crusade. It was a mission for control. Prohibition was a movement created to ban the sale and distribution of alcohol. Supporters believed banning alcohol would end domestic violence fueled by drunken rage. They believed that it would improve poverty because men wouldn't spend their earnings in saloons. And of course, they believed drunkenness was a sin against Almighty God. But Reverend Stokes didn't believe that. He believed that banning alcohol allowed the government to indirectly target black communities by giving police unlimited authority to arrest any black person they thought was drunk, while criminalizing those who made a living selling alcohol. This led to job loss and unfair incarceration. Reverend Stokes had to speak out against prohibition, so he did. He traveled and spoke in towns all across Texas, large and small, in fields and community churches too. He spoke to every black person he could find to encourage them to vote against prohibition to save themselves. On February 25th, 1903, Reverend Stokes arrived in Gregg County, where tensions around prohibition were especially high. His arrival did not go unnoticed. A group of white men who were staunch supporters of prohibition viewed his message as a threat to their agenda. Before he had the chance to address the crowd, the men ambushed him. They dragged him from the meeting site, hauling him into a dense patch of woods. In the woods, the mob tied him to a tree, their faces twisted with anger and hatred. They surrounded him, hurling racial slurs, spitting on him, and pelting him with stones. Reverend Stokes was a man of great faith, but in that moment, he was terrified. With no one nearby to call for help and no way to escape, he did the only thing he could do. He called out to God in prayer, asking for deliverance, but the mob was unmoved. The men closed in on him, their shouts growing louder. Reverend Stokes began to cry. He thought of his wife and children at home and how he might never get to see them again. In a final act of desperation, he made a subtle gesture, a signal of distress used by members of the Masonic order. One of the men in the mob froze after he saw him hold up that sign. The man himself was a Mason, and he recognized the signal immediately. His expression shifted from rage to shock. He stepped forward and placed himself between Reverend Stokes and the other men. The crowd fell silent. For a moment, it seemed as though the mob might reject him, but gradually their anger subsided. Eventually, they relented, untying Reverend Stokes and allowing him to leave. Before letting him go, they issued a stern warning: never, ever come back to Gregg County again. His body was bruised and his spirit shaken, but his life was spared, thanks to the Brotherhood.
Dallas, Texas Black History Uncensored.